a quick report. I'd be happy to give you a quick report. As you know, I did a State of the Island presentation, which Patti was kind enough to provide the link to. So I won't repeat any of the things I said in that presentation, but I will tell you one or two new items since that time. On February 2nd, at a city council meeting, we unanimously approved the first reading of ordinance 4191. This is a very important ordinance for us. It's the one that makes the zoning map comport with the actual zoning language. So that when certain people say that they have a taking going on, that their land is being taken from them because we are changing the map, we are not changing anything. The comprehensive plan has always said, since it was amended before that person's, he who shall not be named, that person's property was purchased, that clearly delineates those properties as special preservation area. And this ordinance provides that the lands adjacent to the Atlantic Ocean and Lake Worth should be conserved by prohibiting any activity that would destroy or significantly disrupt the biological capacity of those areas. The ordinance further provides that the general location of the wetlands preservation areas are identified in Appendix 1, the map, but the burden of determining the specific boundaries according to the criteria set forth in the ordinance shall be upon the applicant. So it's very clear that the city has made provisions to protect that special preservation area, and building will not happen on it over my dead body. And when that certain person says that I'm obsessed with him, I said, you know, I am obsessed. I'm obsessed with protecting the lagoon. So whoever is going to destroy that lagoon, I'm obsessed. So take that. A little quick note about, you know, we have a situation with our wastewater pipe coming away from the island to the mainland. And just this coming week, we will be having a meeting with the owner of the properties that we all refer to as the old yacht club, which are going to be developed. I'm happy to say I've met with the owner and his partner, and it's going to be a beautiful project. But that's where the wastewater pipe is going to come off from. So our engineers are meeting with his engineers so that when they do any development work there, it will be ready to have the pipe just come from that property out to the mainland. The last one that I'll talk about is the landscaping on North Ocean Drive. We were anticipating that it would happen very quickly. We've had some other issues happening on the island that are going to be much, much more expensive than we had originally anticipated. And that's the Palm Beach Isles bridges. I won't go into the details, but in the very near future, I'll be sending you some information about the additional costs that we're incurring for those bridges, but we had to do those bridges. They were in dire need of being repaired. So there was no question about where the money had to go. So I think that's the update since the last time I spoke with you all. Thanks, Patti. Thanks, Mike.
Thank you, Julie. One of the things that we dropped the ball on in the last couple of meetings is the report from Palm Beach Shores. And Alan Flyers could not make today's meeting, and we want to apologize to him. He will be at our next meeting in March and will be at all subsequent meetings. So we will be getting reports, not just from the illustrious Julie Botel, but also from Alan Flyers from Palm Beach Shores. And that's something we want, a mistake we want to rectify, and just want to let all the people in Palm Beach Shores know we haven't forgotten you. We have 2 people on our board from Palm Beach Shores, so we never forget you. So we will be taking care of that in the immediate future. Let's see, agenda, got to read agenda. President's report. I want to remind everybody about our meeting schedule. We have a meeting in March and a meeting in April, and then we go on summer vacation for the rest of the time, so we get to play. The meeting in March is going to be a meeting about hiring managers and management companies. And one of the things we're going to ask to do is we have some of the managers on our email list and others who are aware of our meetings. We're going to ask them to step down from that meeting because we're going to be talking about them and hiring them. And we just think it would be inappropriate to have them sit in on this meeting. So this will be a meeting for people who are, as our bylaws say, are property owners on Singer Island. And we will give you more information on that as we line up speakers and we get ready for that meeting. That will be on March the 5th, I think, if my memory serves correct. And we will be getting you a meeting notice out. We'll also be doing a board qualification program with our friend Michael Kassower, who's here with us today. And Michael's been doing this every year for, I don't know, you can count the number of years. I don't even keep track of them anymore, but we qualify all new board members. You have to do this. It's a requirement. And he in 2 hours, he tells you more about being a director than you ever thought you had to learn. And I've taken that course now 2-3 times just for fun. And every time I take it, I wind up learning something new, like, oh my God, you can do that? Did not know it. So we will be sending a notice out to that on that score. And I just so you can share that information with people in your HOAs and condos and co-ops and everything like that. The meeting will be held and you'll learn all about 718 and 720 and all the things you can and cannot do. So put that on your calendar for March 16th. March 16th.
March 16th. Thank you.
You will be doing that at 5:30 in the evening, and it usually runs somewhere between 90 minutes and 2 hours, depending on questions and how quickly Michael talks and the attendees. When in the good old days, we would do it in person and we'd give you dinner. We're not giving dinner credits for this thing, but it'll be a good meeting and you'll learn lots. So that's that. And let me see what else I wanted to cover today.
Mike, can I interject here? Michael, I'm not going to be around on March the 16th. Can you send me when you're able to your Zoom link and invitation, and I'll let you just run the whole meeting. Is that okay?
Absolutely, not a problem.
Thanks, Michael.
Thank you, Michael. So that's our board qualification program, and I will repeat what's on my agenda at every meeting, which is we ask you for your ideas for programs. As a board, we work together to come up with ideas for programming, like today, like March, and a fun thing in April about landscaping, or as a couple of us call it, Bugs and Slug program. And we're going to be doing a program on that. And so, but we also want to hear from all our members. What do you want for programs? Who would you like to see? We are trying more and more to use members of our own board and members of boards that are on the island to be part of the programs. It's a way of fulfilling our mission, which is to share knowledge with each other. So that's an important part we want to do. And again, please make sure to do that. And if you're so moved and you someplace in your heart want to do this, we're always looking for new directors. So feel free to let us know if you're interested in joining. There are some minimum requirements, but believe me, they're minimum. And you will find that we are a jolly group of people who try hard to come up with programs and do things. And we have survived the pandemic. I think we've had a meeting every time since the pandemic. We learned about Zoom the hard way 2 years ago, and now this is part of our life. And by next year, hopefully we'll be doing this stuff in person and we'll be joining you for coffee. So that is I think that's all I need to cover today. Patti, you want to talk about your administrative updates?
Sure. If anybody wants to ask questions of the panel and they don't want to do it in the chat below, which I'll monitor during their presentations, feel free, as always, to text them to my phone, which is next to me, and then you can be anonymous. My phone is 443-421-2595. Thank you.
Thank you. One thing we also should mention is that we have an election in Riviera Beach. We have mayor and 3 council positions open. We were going to do a regular Zoom meeting and invite the candidates, and we found that every date we had, they had something too. So to avoid a conflict and yet share information with everybody, Patti is working right now, not as we speak, but is working on a video which we'll post on Facebook within the week. And as many of the candidates who are willing to do it are going to submit a 5-minute video, and they're going to answer a couple of questions, basically why they're running and what they want to do. So if you haven't voted yet, may I suggest you hold off until the end of the week and get a chance to look at the video. I had a neighbor last night ask me, well, who should I vote for? And I said, I'll let you know by next weekend. So that my answer is let's hear what they have to say. Let's have that opportunity. And if you're voting again in the Riviera Beach portion of the program, let's try and look at that video we think you'll find it useful. So that covers that.
Yeah, I just want to add something to what Mike's saying about this this virtual forum. It's like a pre-recorded forum. I did the first recording last night with one of the mayoral candidates. I've only heard from 5 total out of the 11 persons who are running for office on March the 8th. And of course, I have a concern that if not everybody's there, we're not giving everybody an equal opportunity. But I've sent them reminders as well. So hopefully everybody will, follow through in a timely manner so that I can put it all together. And wish me luck. I hope everything goes well.
Okay, fingers crossed.
Thank you.
All right. Kathleen, do we still have some money? Can we pay our bills?
We do. Patty's spending a bit of it. But yes, some money. We have $6,932 as of right now.
Very good. We will be looking to probably incurring some additional expenses as the year goes on. And so it sounds like we have money, but we have insurance money to pay. We have other expenses. But thank you very much. Remember, our meeting are run from HOAs and condos paying their dues, and we get to attend under their umbrella. So that becomes a part of what our life is about. And we thank our corporate members. We thank all the people who attend our meetings. And we hope you learned something from our efforts here. And with that, I think it's time to do a panel. We came up, I don't know, I'll give credit to somebody who came up with this program. It's an interesting program. Patti, you want to go to recording?
I am recording now.
You're recording now.
Yep,
Okay.
thank you.
We came up with a program about the difficult people you're dealing with. My experience for spending 10 years on a board at the Martinique is there are a lot of difficult people around, and some of them are on the board. And I'm going to address some of that later on. But we have a panel today of three people who have joined us to give us different perspectives on what this is all about. And the first one is Marty Zipern, who's at the Seawinds. And Marty has not done a panel for us before. Not only has joined the panel and is going to help us out here, but he also prepared a list of possible things we can talk about. So Julie, Michael, you probably got that from me a day or two ago. And I'm going to work off that list, but that's not what we're limited to. So I want you to jump in. This is going to be a very informal panel. The three of us are going to just bat around ideas about what you can do to keep your board functioning and keep the community happy. Marty, do you want me to go through your discussion topics, or would you like to take?
I'd be delighted to do it, Michael.
Sorry?
I'd be delighted to do it.
All right. So
I would, if I could interrupt, I would just like to suggest, I think it was Michael, one of you suggested that several of them could be grouped together. Marty, if you don't mind, if we could do numbers 2, 4, and 5, they seem to all relate to owners wanting to discuss certain things at board meetings, arguments or at board meetings with owners, those 3 topics, because I think we can combine a couple of them. I don't want to step on your questions and eliminate any, but I think if we were to combine, for example, those 3 to begin with, that might make a good beginning. What do you think?
Well, okay, I'm going to start a little bit in a different place than I said I was going to start.
Oh,
so
okay.
Let me just introduce this by saying, Michael asked me to set forth a list of issues that directors face or problems that directors may face in dealing with their job as a director. And I've come up with a list of 10 or 11 items, which we want to talk about. Now, I'm going to start off with perhaps the most sensitive or most difficult, and that's in dealing with COVID issues. What happens when somebody in the building gets COVID? What are the obligations of the director? What are the obligations of the board? What should they do? There are 2 different ways of looking at it. Some people say, well, the director should do nothing and just let it keep a private affair, which is one way. Another way is the directors do have an obligation to share with the building what's going on, that there is somebody in the building who has COVID. Then comes the next question. do the directors have an obligation, or should they disclose who that person is who has the COVID? There's an advantage in doing that, in that the next door neighbor who didn't know will now know that that person has COVID. And there's a disadvantage in that the person who has COVID may wants to keep it private. We want to encourage building condo owners to disclose to the board that they do have COVID. So what do directors do? And I'm going to turn it over to the panel to get their thoughts.
I'm going to toss that to Michael first, because a lot of these questions I think are legal. I can tell you what we've done in the Tiara. And I can tell you from personal experience, because I came back having been in Washington, D.C. and been in touch with one of the senators who had COVID. So I self-quarantined way early. I think it was March of 2020. But as a condo board member, I have other opinions. So Michael, maybe you should cover the legal aspects first, and then we can talk about what we could do.
No problem. Thank you, Julia, and thank you, Marty. So first of all, let's start with what you have to do. In my opinion, I don't think that there is an obligation of the board of directors at this point in time to be taking some sort of affirmative action to disclose that somebody in the building does have COVID, or even to take it even further, the identity of that person. As far as whether the association wants to voluntarily have some sort of program to the contrary, first and foremost, to work in reverse, I suppose, I would not ever disclose somebody's identity that has COVID without their express written consent. Full stop. If they wanted to say, let everybody know I'll say the earlier on in the pandemic, there was a lot of people that did step up and offer that, because everybody was very, even more sensitive in a lot of respects than they are now. People didn't know what to make of the whole situation as clearly as maybe they do now. And so for that reason, people were saying, I'm loud, I'm proud, and I'm right here to tell you, because I don't want anyone in my community to be scared, because I would be scared if I knew somebody vaguely in the community had COVID, but I didn't know the identity and who to look out for, so to speak. As far as letting people in the community know that somebody has COVID, I have no problem with that. As far as generally to say that there is an owner or an occupant that has COVID without disclosing the identity. I think that if you honor everything else I said before now, you are going to increase the probability of people wanting to cooperate and volunteer that they have COVID in the building on a cooperative basis. Now, whether or not that is something that you should do for the purpose of your community, I'll consider that a political/business decision. If your community wants to say, you know what, at this stage of the pandemic, we've made the decision that we just don't need to be serving that function, I'll respect that. If you choose to say, you know what, we have a community of people that want to be very sensitive to COVID issues, and people desire this information, so we want to try to gather it on a voluntary basis from our community and disseminate it with, in a vague way that does not disclose identities without permission, I respect that policy as well. But that's a decision for your board. I do not think there is any duty to disclose, but I do think that you do have that optionality as a board of directors.
Thanks. I'll speak from the Tiara's perspective. We did alert people in the beginning that there was someone in the building who had COVID. I think it made people feel even more comfortable to some extent, because they knew that we were being open and transparent about it. And I say we, I'm no longer on the board, but the administration, the general manager here told people that that person was in quarantine, that person was not using the elevators, not out in public, and so on. So I think it made people to some extent feel that, okay, they're being honest. We know that there's somebody, but that person's being sick. I myself stepped forward when I was in touch with Senator Scott's office, and I had been up there in DC, and said, you can tell people I've got it. It's okay. I'm staying home. I never got it. When I had my breakthrough case, again, I told them I've got it. I'm not coming near anybody else. I'm staying in my apartment. Thank God for, I shouldn't put a plug in for Instacart, but at least get groceries, and we're lucky in our building because we have a valet and they can bring up, I gave them my mail keys. They would bring up my mail, leave it outside the door. So I think as open and honest as you can be, people appreciate that, as we would never, unless someone says, please tell people it's me, I don't mind. Unless someone says, I don't think it's appropriate at all, as Michael has said, to disclose the name of somebody. It's almost like a HIPAA violation in my mind. You really can't go around telling people who's sick and who's not, but that's how we handled it.
And the Martinique had very much what you're talking about here. Early on, when there was a case in the building, we simply put the word out, there's someone in the building has COVID. that was before vaccines. That was when everybody was petrified about doing it. I think now, and you're talking about later stages of hopefully of a pandemic becoming an endemic. If someone has COVID, the only time it comes up is if we have a restaurant, you have to close the restaurant if somebody who's working here comes down with COVID. And
Yep.
we've gone through that. And Julie, I don't know if
We have as well. We had to close the marquee upstairs, maybe a month ago, because one of the servers had it. And I'm remembering back now, in the very early stages, it wasn't in your building. People would call me and say, I heard someone on the island has COVID.
Yes, I heard that. Yes.
There's someone on the island. I was like, oh my God. But then again, in those days, we were wiping down every grocery item that came in the house. So we've learned so much in these 2 years about how to handle a virus. So things have changed in the course of these 2 years. Things have certainly changed.
Yeah. And
What about the question of contractors coming into the building or delivery people coming into the building? Go ahead, Julie.
We restrict them to one elevator, and of course they must wear a mask. Of course, they always have to sign in, so we know if a contractor has come into the building and something happens, but we do restrict them to the service elevator. They're not to mingle in the rest of the elevators or anything. I don't know if that's.
And we do that at Seawinds as well, and I think it's important that they be compelled to wear masks when they come in.
Yeah.
So we have the same thing at the Martinique. Yeah, we require that. And then the individual owners, if they have people coming in, cleaning people. I mean, I had someone that was going to have through my windows, we used to work here. And I called him to set the date up and everything like that. And I said, oh, by the way, I assume you've been vaccinated. And there was a pause. And he said, no, I haven't been vaccinated. I said, well, then, no, you can't come through my windows. So everybody has to have this common sense here too. Yeah. And it doesn't always exist in communities, but you have to have common sense to be able to say, no, this is not acceptable. We expect the contractors to wear a mask, but when I look around the Martinique, I feel like Joan and I and maybe 10 other people, the other ones that wear a mask and we get in the elevator because we feel we're vulnerable. We've had enough experience to feel that way. Most of the people here don't even bother anymore. We have a gym. I looked in the gym. Of course, nobody in the gym wears a mask. So you have to have enough sense of what's right, what's wrong. And I don't think the board can take a too aggressive a position because right now, most people are vaccinated. And if they get COVID, they're not going to wind up in the hospital. They're not going to wind up on a ventilator, and they're not going to wind up 6 feet under. So the question really is, what do we need at this stage of the game? So Marty, what I'm saying to you is, it's still a concern for everybody, but we're not at the same point we were in March of 2020 when Julie came back to Senator Scott's office and went, whoops, I got a quarantine.
Yeah. Okay, let's go on to the next subject. Relationship between directors. Since directors, like any, let me call it political organization, have problems with each other. What happens when there's a board that has a number of people on, a number of directors that have different viewpoints and arguments get involved between them? How does a board handle that? How do they amicably resolve disputes between the directors? And that can come up in so many different ways. It can come up with major issues that come up, for example, assessments, changes, decorations in the building, all kinds of areas that people have different ideas about. How do directors deal with different thoughts and how do they agree amicably to get along? Julie?
Well, this has happened as recently as this past, after the last election, not this current election, because we didn't have anybody running other than the current, we only had a set number of people running. But the prior election, we actually had 5 people step down from the board because they could not get along with, and they were in the majority. I mean, they could have done anything they want to do, but they chose to step down. I've had a long history of working. I break it up? Sorry.
Yeah.
I have a long history of working in major organizations, and at times you just have to, sometimes you have to call in somebody to do a mediation or to do a board training. I've done many a board training where, you know, you sit down with folks and say, look, here's how you get consensus. Here's how you, and if it gets to the point where it's so bad that they're not functioning, you might have to do that. You know, we're all adults and we can take advice, and we're all in it for the benefit of the communities in which we live. I think another important thing is to be sure that the board is reflecting the wishes of the community. You know, sometimes people get elected and they forget, hey, I got elected by a group of people who live with me, who are my neighbors, and I really am responsible to them, not to what my husband or wife thinks I should do or my best friend thinks I should do, but to the larger community, which is why I think one of the topics you mentioned, Marty, was communication with residents and owners. I have relied on SurveyMonkey, for example, so often to say to the board, look, we sent out a survey. Maybe not everybody responded, but a good portion of people, this is what the community wants. So if you think that we should do this assessment now, or that we should, oftentimes it comes up with how much of a reserve do you want to build, right? So some people are in the building and they don't want to put any more into a reserve because they figure they're going to be selling next year and they don't want to use their money, that let it go to the next person. Other people feel like, well, I'm going to be here for a long haul and I want the reserve to be built up because I don't want a big assessment a year from now or 2 years from now. So that's a question that I think is best answered by the whole community, not by 5 people or 7, however many you have on the board typically.
Julie, I think the mediator idea is a great idea. Where would you find the mediator? Would you look within the building or outside?
If you might have somebody in the building, but there are professional mediators. I mean, there are.
That costs money.
Yeah,
Well,
but sometimes you can get somebody to do it for a reasonable amount if they've, you know, have an interest in the island or the condo. I mean, Michael could probably do it. If your board attorney might be able to do it. Michael, do you have experience working with mediators?
I've experience working with mediators. I've operated informally in that capacity as counsel. You know, it depends a lot on my perception in the community, honestly, and the reality of my function is uniform, but the perception is not always there. Meaning that if I have, you know, the ability, for instance, at, you know, the Martinique is a great example. I've been there for so long. And I've worked with so many people there that I like to think that I can sort of help hash things out from time to time. So yes, it can be something that's a formal mediator that you hire and pay an hourly rate. Could be a trusted person in the community, whether it's an owner, manager, anybody else for that matter. And the other thing I wanted to throw out there, and this is a style thing a little bit, and I've had to learn my own lesson with this in practice as a board member now, because I made the decision to become a volunteer just like everyone else here. It's a deed that I'm sure will be rewarded for the rest of my life. But the idea is pretty simple. Try to disagree privately and decide publicly. It's not to say that you should be having meetings in secret, but it's not a meeting if it's not a quorum present. And, you know, I'll give an example. I mentioned I was on a board. There's something recently that came up that I had a pretty strong difference on. And when I got to the meeting, unfortunately, I made the mistake of having a concern, briefly expressing the concern, but not fully discussing the concern I had with the different board members. And then I went into the meeting and I had to express the reason why I was voting the way I did a little bit. And it just created a little bit of a negative aura when I could have probably expressed some of those concerns privately. And by doing it that way, you avoid a couple things. Number one, there's no public flogging, so to speak, of somebody getting up there and getting on their soapbox or ranting. Not that I took it that far in my instance, but you avoid any sort of display. And when you have an audience, people tend to want to, express themselves more fully, I would say. And by doing that, you avoid offending people's sensitivities, their egos, or anything of that nature, which can allow you to then continue to work together on other things. And I always tell people that, I know a lot of us are disappointed with the fact that you don't even see like hearings take place in Washington anymore, at least not genuine hearings. It tends to be people getting up there and giving a show. You want board members to be able to talk to each other, left, right, center, whatever it might be. And by not ever publicly being so hostile, you're going to engender that sort of professionalism on your board and allow yourselves to deliberate in a manner that just doesn't sacrifice all ability for you to work together on other items in the future.
Let me just add, Marty, let me just add something.
Go ahead, Michael, I'm sorry.
Early on my time on the board, there was the whole thing of the Martinique, and the board president left and they engineered somebody coming on the board and making her president. I was unhappy. and we went to war. And I was ready to go to the state and ask the state for guidance because I read our docs and what was being done looked wrong. A friend of mine who was on the board sat me down one day and said, listen, you're right, she's wrong, you can do that. My question to you is, you have to live with this person. She's part of the community just like you are. Is it worth it to you to go to war with somebody over an issue that you consider personal? And it was a piece of advice. I sat and I listened and I said, I know I'm right. I know she's wrong, but in the scheme of things, it's done by now. Let's move forward and the hell with the state. And I think sometimes when you're on a board, you have to be able to look at the people you're dealing with and say to yourself and to them, look, let's have an open discussion about something and let's agree to disagree. And that it's very hard. There's an ego thing when people get on a board, and you see it when boards transition. When a new board comes in, it's like a political party taking over from another political party. The first thing they want to do is undo everything the last board did. And the next thing they want to do is put in their agenda. And it becomes this constant tug of war over who's going to do what. And you have to be able to look around and say, what principle will I stand on? When the Martinique was going to get a liquor license, two of us were against it. And we really were violently against it. And it was passed with a bare majority. And they then say, you have to sign paperwork for the state to do this. And I asked a certain lawyer that we all know on our board, I said, what would you do? And he just looked back at me and he said, you'd have to be crazy to do that. And so I refused to do it. And I went up being invited to leave the board along with somebody else. Now, was it worth it? You bet it was. I had my 10 years time in. That's more than enough time to be on a board. But the reality is you have to be able to draw lines and make a judgment as to what you think is worth doing and what you think is just part of the business. And very few people are prepared to be a director. That's why we do the board program. That's why we have COASI, because we want to find out, what do I do? I'm on the board. I've never been on a volunteer board in a condo or an HOA. Now what happens? And I think you have to be able to go in that direction and find a way to work together. And the mediator is a great idea. At some point, some boards need a mediator. And the only problem with a mediator is you have to get a consensus on the board to get a mediator to come in.
It's true. But I would think that, again, we're all adults. If the board really wants to work on behalf of the community, they would agree to a mediation if it's that serious an issue. And maybe oftentimes your general manager could act as in that capacity. That's the person who's going to have to carry out any directives that come from the board. That's the person who's got a vested interest in seeing that there is unanimity or at least consensus and would work to build it if you've got a good general manager. So.
My recommendation would be initially that the president in particular look at the issue and then try to get the people to sit down, those that are arguing privately, to resolve it. It should start with him. And then if that doesn't work, then a mediator, I think, is appropriate.
Yeah.
So that's how I'd look at it.
Yeah,
Let me go on to the next issue, which is really part of this issue. Agendas, what happens at meetings? And when there are arguments, particularly when owners demand that a particular item gets on that agenda, what do the directors do? What do the directors do if half of the directors want one item on the agenda and the others don't want that item on the agenda? How do they resolve these disputes within themselves?
So
Go ahead, Mike.
I'll just jump in and give the legal framework, and then I'll allow others to give some political thoughts to build on it. I can give a little bit of time maybe to hand off there. First of all, most bylaws provide something along the following line, but you should always look to your own. Typically, the president sets the agenda, but there is actually an option, not a widely known thing, for the directors to petition for agenda items. Basically, a common provision is that a third of the directors can establish agenda items. So that's something that the minority often is not aware of, that they can kind of stick their nose into it, so to speak. But hopefully it shouldn't come to that. Because sunlight is typically the best disinfectant. And so even if you were a president that was operating with a course and custom in your association of not allowing those other items, it is generally, in my experience, good to socialize things in the long run, air them out and allow people to speak, because Kind of like, a pot that's got the lid on it when with boiling water. Eventually it starts, things start to get a little combustible underneath. So if you don't allow people to express themselves, they tend to get more frustrated. One overarching theme that I believe in, and this applies to inner board conflict and then community conflict at large, I think it's really, really important in most instances. Some people you can't help and you can't get along with, but it's important to let people feel like they're being heard and that their opinions are respected, even if they're not agreed with. So if you don't agree with what your director has to say, if you don't agree with what an owner has to say, telling them that they're not going to get to speak about it and that you don't care what they have and diminishing their opinions, it's typically going to make these situations just progressively escalate. Now, so again, some people are, even if you give them respect, they don't respond in kind. But a lot of the time I find that if you hear people out, even if you ultimately say publicly, I think you're, with complete respect, just wrong, at least you gave them a chance to be heard, and that makes them feel respected, and that makes them feel like their opinion matters, and that makes them less likely to get into an emotional fight with you, and that causes larger problems and disruption to your community.
And what about the owner that stands up at a meeting and says, I demand to be heard. I think this item should be on the agenda. It's important you painted the hallways blue. It should have been green. What do you do about that?
Well, go ahead, Michael.
And this will be my last one. Just to give the legal framework, the right to speak legally is to agenda items. Doesn't mean though that everything I just said is not true. Although I do question the color choices there, but go ahead, Julie.
I was going to say, I've learned an awful lot in my time on council, my 4 years so far on council, on city council. And I think some of that I would love, if I'm ever on a Tiara board again or any condo board again, I would love to bring back. And one of the things is we have a public comment section in every agenda. I would think that if every condo board meeting started, maybe you start the meeting a little early, 5 o'clock, and you devote the first hour just to listening to anything they want to talk about. That's the public comment section. Doesn't have to be on the agenda, anything they want, but you don't engage in dialogue and you limit them to 2 to 3 minutes apiece. So you're not going to have somebody getting up there making a 20-minute speech about whatever, the color of the walls. You limit the time, which is what we do, and it's legitimate as long as you're giving them an opportunity. They have a chance to vent. You don't engage with them. You don't answer anything at that point. You just listen, and you just model good, attentive listening. Then you have your regular meeting, and people can speak after the president allows them to, can speak, again, limiting the time on an agenda item. And then at the end of the meeting, you say, okay, anybody like to suggest topics for a future agenda? And then let them suggest, but don't say, yes, we're going to put it on there. Say, we'll take that under advisement. And that way they've had a chance to speak on general items without getting into an argument. You just listen, and you listen actively and nod and say, and then you have your regular meeting with your agenda items, and then you have a chance for them to say, I'd like to speak at I'd like to have the next agenda, this topic. And then you can just say, look, we'll talk about it. And then it goes back to the directors with the president to say, okay, what do we want to have? And then you employ Michael's just discovered notion that a third can always get something put on whether the president likes it or not. I'd love to see that happen in a condo board meeting the way it does. Not that we always have dignified speakers at our city council meetings, but at least people are allowed and feel like they have a chance to voice their.
I think that's a great idea. Michael, do you have any negative thoughts about that?
I'm sorry, negative thoughts about what? I say
about that. I think Julie's suggestion, I think it's a great idea.
Oh, for the open forum at the beginning,
Yeah.
I think it is a really nice idea. I think that it just goes to the heart of, you're elected officials and you're being responsive to your constituents' concerns. The one thing that I'm sure is that sometimes good deeds do go punished, in the sense that you may end up having some people come in there and try to hijack the meeting and get fired up. But I love it as a concept of serving that purpose of letting the people be heard. That's ultimately who you're there to serve.
And I also love the idea that at the end of the meeting, people coming up and being able to say, I would like to see in the next meeting an agenda item, blah, 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 because it gives an opportunity for people in the community to say, we're interested in this subject. You're not thinking about this subject right now. How about talking about it at the next board meeting? So I like the balance. And I think it's really a question of sales. The sales marketing part of me comes out. And so I look at it and say, you just have to get a board to accept the fact that they're not really just the only people that have a brain in the community. The other people are there, and they're the majority, really. And when we're on the board, we serve them. It's not an ego trip for us, although in many condos, it becomes an ego trip. So you
All
have to
right,
be.
let me go on to the next item. Directors are frustrated sometimes, not sometimes, but often, where they'd like to be able to talk and can't talk unless it's done within the legal parameters, or where they're able to talk at meetings with notices. Michael, I'm going to turn this over to you. Is there any way that directors, one or two of them, can really talk about issues that are important to the board without violating Florida law?
Well, one or two, assuming that you're on a board of more than three, is usually the answer is yes. And I mean that's a quorum comment that I'm speaking to there.
Yes.
Any time that you convene a majority of the board of directors together, board of governors, as you may call it, at a single time, you do run the risk of being considered a board meeting, which should be noticed. And so that's the thing to keep in mind, is that you need to, be sensitive to whether or not that is going to be crossing the line in your community or as a matter of law. So if you are going to be very sensitive and very strict in abiding by those principles, which as a lawyer, of course, I have to tell you, you should be, then you can always try to find a way to have less than a quorum convened to socialize issues. So for instance, if you have a 5-member board, there's no issue getting, 2 people, maybe 1 representative from each side if it's a partisan issue, so to speak. And you can try to hash things out that way. And that does not need to be done in an open manner.
So my concern is a crisis comes up, an emergency comes up, where the directors really should be talking to each other about how to handle it. And there's no time for a notification to the owners. What do you do at that point?
Well, I mean, look, at the end of the day, I always have an overarching principle that came up a lot during COVID, which is that if it's a matter of health, safety, welfare, and maybe this is not a popular thing for a lawyer to say, you do what you have to do. Full stop. Okay. I'm not gonna, if when we were dealing with a pandemic that we thought that, there was a 10 to 12% mortality rate, I wasn't going to worry about convening a meeting and then, what the division of condominiums might say about something when it came to something that could cause something so severe. So there's that. The one other thing I do want to get out here, because it's really important. A lot of people are of the opinion that a good way to get around this is board members should email with one another. And that might be true, but there is a very concerning declaratory statement that came out from division last month. And just wait for this. This is gonna, for some people that have been on boards for a while, this is gonna shock your conscience a little bit here. The division recently held that private emails amongst board members are responsive to an official records request. So for instance, that means michael.sloser@gmail.com. That's not his email, but if it is, at least if it is, it was a lucky guess. Michael.sloser@gmail.com sends an email to another director at the Martinique, let's say Penny Pompey @gmail.com. That email, according to this declaratory statement from the division, is now an official record of the association when it's about association business. Shocking, shocking, shocking. And this just goes to a whole separate concern I could talk about for days about records requests. But now board members have to worry about communications by email being responsive to a records request. But the simple answer is, if you want to be certain you're not going to have an issue here, get less than a quorum together. Otherwise, schedule meetings. And if you want to be certain you're in legal compliance, and that's that.
Okay. Julie, any comment?
No, I agree completely. You can generally find 3 people without violating any sunshine laws. Get small groups of people together, get the consensus, and then move on. I mean, you don't need to have a full meeting. If you've got an emergency, you can get small groups together and figure out what the best course of action is.
And I'm okay with expedited notice in an emergency as well, by the way. So right. If it's like an urgent, like we need to get on the phone right now, that's the COVID 12% mortality rate statement. But otherwise, you can always do expedited notice if there's an emergency situation.
What about directors going out to lunch or dinner together?
As long as they're not count the numbers, we all got 9 fingers. If you can figure a way that if it's more than the quorum, then you really have, I think you've got trouble. If you're not even talking about anything that has to do with the condo, it's a matter of perception. Anybody is going to say, everybody's got a cell phone now. You're going to have a picture come out and it's going to get spread around the condominium. These 5 people were together and they were talking about painting the walls blue. So I would say avoid it.
Well, there's you have a party. These are your friends, the directors, and you invite them to a party.
If you've got a party with you know, one of my friends had a birthday party, 80th birthday party upstairs. I'm sure there were probably more than 5, but in that kind of a large group, they're not huddled together at the same table. You know, it's a big group. I was envisioning that you were saying a dinner party with just those 5 directors, let's say, and their
Two
spouse.
different issues. Yes, you're right. Okay.
I think you have to have common sense, Marty.
Yeah, that's a common sense kind of thing.
Okay.
The statutes talk about conducting business. The problem is it's not
Yes.
clear whether conducting
Yes.
business is deliberations or voting or something in between.
Yeah.
Okay, next issue. Going to talk about quorums in 2 different areas. One of in simply passing important issues that the owners have to vote upon. And secondly, with regard to assessments, major and minor when they come up. How do we handle that? It's very often, it's very difficult to get a quorum of owners to do anything. They're simply not interested. Many people want to just come on vacation in beautiful Singer Island. They don't want to know about business of the building. So what do we do about that?
You know, this has been a struggle, I think, since e-voting came on the scene. I would love to see more condominiums adopt, and I don't know, Michael, maybe you've got experience with some of your buildings doing voting by e-voting. I have been led to believe that it results in a higher number of people voting, obviously, because if you've got Canadians or South Americans and they don't get up here, or they don't even get them, sometimes they don't get the mail for 2 weeks after it's been sent out. That's a big problem. I think that the more we take a look at using the technology to solve our problems, the more people will get involved. Maybe I'm wrong. Michael probably has better experience because he deals with a number of buildings.
I think Julie's comments about electronic voting being a way to help with this are fantastic, and I encourage associations to start exploring this more and more. I'll also add that, again, going to go back to communication here. I find that if you are going for a vote on something, let's say, it's important that you have some sort of membership workshop about that vote in advance, especially in the age of Zoom. Even if you don't have electronic voting, you can still convene electronically. And by letting people know what's going on, this is, you know, Michael, remember this from the amendments probably at Martinique. We did membership workshops before we proposed the amendments and after we proposed the amendments. And they did a, you know, poke the lawyer day a couple different times where they brought me up and I sat in the owner's lounge and people could pepper me with questions about what we were considering proposing. And then once we proposed it, what it all really meant. And not everybody agreed with every statement I said. But because they had the chance for input before and after, they were more inclined to participate. The other thing I recommend is maybe a communications committee, somebody that, you know, that way you have a system of just sending out reminders to people, because at the end of the day, a lot of people do care more about this stuff than you might think, but they're not going to respond to one legal package in the mail. There needs to be some plain English communication and follow-up.
Anybody else?
Go ahead, Michael.
Well, when it comes to that, I was going to cover that at the end. Excuse me. At the end, when we talk about communications, one of the things that, and I'll talk about it a little bit in a minute. One of the problems we always find in a condo is we don't focus on communicating with our membership, and we assume we're top down and we should be bottom up. And one of the things you sometimes have to do is you have to be able to talk people into doing things that are not in their best interest. Let's do it now and combine it all, because I know Michael's got a story and I've got a story. When the Martinique had to redo its HVAC system in 2015, I think it was, we had to shut down the air conditioning in the summer months for 6 weeks, I believe it was. And if you think it's popular to shut down the air conditioning and then say, oh, by the way, we've arranged for you to buy a portable air conditioner and we'll help you install it in your unit so you'll at least have some cooling in your system if you're here full time, or you're not here and your place is just going to have mold, you're going to be not really very popular. We had board members who were engineers, and then we decided, look, why should the board do this all by itself? And another person and myself decided, let's form a committee of board members and community members, and let's make it a communications group. And we spent the months during the project writing up practically a daily tally of what's going on. I wrote 22 of those darn things. And I still remember we went to a meeting and all the engineers were talking about, we're going to do this and we're going to do that. And everybody's eyes are glazing over. All they're hearing is no air conditioning, July and August, it's going to be a disaster. I got up there and I said, I have no idea what these people are talking about, but I will translate it to you and I will send it out to you and I will keep you up to date on what's going on. And the first couple of times, people were really annoyed. They were pissed is what they were. And they were not happy, but we kept doing it. And after a while, people would stop you in the hallway and go, thank you very much. I didn't realize we were going to have to do this or do that. And we spent 2 months writing these things. And at the end of that time, not one of us lost the next election because we were transparent. And sometimes you have to be able to accept the fact that as a board, you not only have to function as a board, but you've got to find the talent to be able to do what has to be done. And I would urge any condo or any HOA to have at least one person who has some PR or some marketing experience or some writing experience who knows how to sell something. Because when you can do that, you're not constrained by Michael Kassower and a legal terminology, although Michael's pretty good at selling stuff. So I won't take that away from him. Yeah.
That didn't sound like a compliment, Mike. Just going to say.
Oh, come on. Of course it was a compliment. But being able to take the problems that come about that are going to be unpopular and quote, spinning them into a story, telling a story. I had a business partner who always said, the first thing we got to do is we got to tell a story. You've got to tell the story about why the condo needs to do what it's about to do. Here's how it's going to impact your lives. And here's what we're going to do to make it as tolerable as we possibly can. And at the end of the day, when we're done, life will be much better than when we started this whole process. And it's not a pleasant experience, but I have to tell you, it was a learning experience for someone who had been spending a lot of time in his career doing this stuff to suddenly realize you can get people to accept something which is not really very popular if you're honest with them. You tell them, basically tell them.
Michael, 2 questions. Can email be used for notices to the condo owners in place of certified mail or regular mailings?
I get to give you the best lawyer answer ever. It depends. There is an option to do that under the statute. It requires a consent form where the owner voluntarily opts into receiving notices by email, and then it can be done. The only thing that I'll disclaim on that that tends to come up quite a bit is you should recognize that once an owner opts into electronic notice, their email becomes responsive to a records request as well.
Okay, so that's a problem, really. It really is. It's a problem. From
Michael, if I can interject here with a couple questions from the audience, please. The first one, legal question, are text messages among board members subject to the declaratory statement rule, subject to records request?
This is what I'll say, that declaratory statement is what I would call persuasive precedent. To go over one of the concepts in the board cert course that we talk about. If a ruling comes down from an appellate court, the District Court of Appeals in Florida, the circuit courts in the federal system, or a Supreme Court in either the state or federal system, it creates binding precedent. Declaratory statements from the division condominiums are not binding, but they are an indication of how the division might rule. So what does that mean? If the arbitration section of the division is inclined to follow the logic of that declaratory statement, if a records request challenge is filed, I don't see how you distinguish a text message from an email. Now, I think the logic is horrifying. I think it is. I mean, what this will do, it'll make it even harder to get good people to serve on boards of directors because they're going to feel like their lives are going to be invaded. But yes, I think it's quite possible that text messages would be treated the same as emails.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense, definitely. Second question from the audience, just clarify, please, can the board vote to have voting via email?
No, you cannot.
Go ahead, Michael, sorry.
Board members voting on board issues cannot vote by email. It actually says it in the statute. You can set up electronic voting for membership votes, but no is the answer. You can have people vote by telephone. You could do telephonic meetings, Zoom meetings in this day and age, but no, you can't vote by email.
And of course, by Zoom.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah, and just to clarify a little bit further on that, a board can vote among themselves to establish the right to do electronic mailing and voting for their community.
Yes, that's to establish it. Once they establish it by resolution, then the only way that any individual owner can participate is if they sign a consent similar to the one I described before. So what I always tell associations is that, look, if you want to do electronic voting for your next election, let's say 2023, don't wait until next fall to start the process, because you're going to have 0 consents to opt in. And then you're going to have like 3 people on the board who chose to use it, and it was no benefit to anyone. Start now, start collecting the consents. Maybe if you have a newsletter that goes out every month, attach the consents and say, we're at, you can keep a running tally. We're at 12 of 296. We're at 32. Please sign, please sign. And it'll save you a lot. It'll allow the voting to go a lot better in the future.
Okay, I think that covered the questions so far from the audience. Thank you so much.
I'm going to jump back in another topic. Overseeing of committees by the board and the responsibilities of the committee. Can they meet privately? And what should the board do about the meetings of committees? Michael, I'll turn it over to you again.
Okay. So the issue of meeting with committees is actually one that has a recent statutory amendment that I'm going to pull up right now. Not that everyone's going to get to see it, but this is something that there was an amendment to 617, which is the not-for-profit statute that just came down this past year. And what is really, really important to break out here is that it's critical whether or not that this is an advisory committee or a committee that has some sort of decision-making authority. If it is an advisory committee, then you have the ability. Then you have an ability to have. It's more of a secondary issue in the statutory development. If you have an advisory committee, you can have a committee that is comprised of people who are not a majority of directors. The recent development on the committee front, really not responsive to your question here, is that if you have any sort of decision-making authority of the committee, that you need to have a majority of those people be directors, with the exception of the grievance committee hearing or committee. The question you asked, though, is whether or not these meetings need to be noticed. The answer is yes, that committee meetings do need to be noticed, just like board meetings, 48 hours in advance. And there should be agenda items on there just the same. There can be exceptions like legal or litigation committee meetings where you might have a de minimis notice. And
so if John, Billy, and Jane would like to meet informally to discuss what color the wall should be, they could do that as a committee. But it wouldn't be a committee. They would simply be a group of owners who are meeting privately.
If there's a legitimately formed committee of 5 people and 3 of them want to get together to discuss the business of that committee, that quite arguably could need to be a notice committee meeting. One thing I'll say off the record on this recorded meeting is that pay attention to the climate of your community when you're dealing with these issues, because while the lawyer answer is the lawyer answer, I think it's really important to recognize being respectful of the sensitivities of your community. And if you're in a climate where people are very concerned about this, you need to be mindful that 3 of 5 of a committee discussing the subject matter of that committee is a committee meeting that's subject to notice requirements.
I guess what I'm trying to find out, if informally a committee can meet informally without being called a committee.
If you don't establish them as a committee, and you just have it be if it's just 5 people in the community that the president and the vice president who are spearheading the redecoration decide that, you know what, these 5 people could be helpful to me. If you don't form it as a formal committee, then sure.
Just a recommending committee, a recommending group of people. Fine. Okay, good. Next area. Enforcement of condo bylaws and rules by owners. When owners violate some of the condo rules, what should directors do about it? And I know that's a very broad question, but it's a question that can be sensitive sometimes, because the directors do set forth rules, and very often the owners say, we don't care about these rules. So what do the directors do? How do they handle it?
Well, there are consequences. I mean, I have a gazebo, or there are restaurants here in the building, or, their access to common areas can even be. There are, of course, these are all set forth in a document. I mean, it's not like you spring it on somebody. Oh, you did this, so therefore you're not allowed to go upstairs anymore. I mean, if you've got consequences set forth in a document, then you have some teeth in the rules and regulations. Michael, do you have a legal answer?
My legal answer would be that you need to help people understand when you go to enforcement that it's not personal and that you have a duty to enforce these things, because if you don't enforce it with them, while it might seem like a small deal that they were, let's say, grilling on their balcony and they stop grilling and they say they're not going to do it again, If you don't find that person, theoretically, if that's your association's course and custom, then what are you going to do the next time around? You can't find the next person, and then all of a sudden the rule has no meaning. And it can.
All right, so let's talk about finding. How does that set up? How do the directors set up a findings committee?
So the way that I do it is if you're a condo 718 3025, I believe it is, on a 303, excuse me, 718 303. The way it works is that you establish a grievance committee. Some people call it a finding committee, some people call it a violations committee, but it has the ability to do fines and suspensions. The board needs to appoint 3 people who are not on the board or related to any board member or officer, director, whatever you might want to call it. No relation, not a co-owner, I would say also, even though I don't think the co-owner matters in the statute specifically. And I think that you then, when you have at least 3 people, maybe up to 5, serving on that impartial committee, the function is as follows. Anytime you have a suspension that is being levied or a fine, the board of directors initially votes to impose that fine or suspension. There are different schools of thought in my industry about what kind of notice is required of that initial board meeting, but the minimum requirement that I think you can argue is that it's 48 hours notice, or some communities even escape that by doing what I would call sentencing guidelines, where they establish in advance that if you grill on the balcony, it's $100 fine, and the board adopts that as a sentencing guideline. And just making the analogy to criminal penalties, which when you have the box, and that's how you figure out how long someone goes to jail. The other thing from there, though, once you've either gone through sentencing guidelines or the board vote to impose the fine or suspension, and talk to your lawyer about which approach to take that first stage, because different lawyers have different thoughts on how that'll hold up if ever challenged. You then have to provide 14 days written notice to the violator of a hearing before the grievance committee, or an opportunity for a hearing is actually what the statute says. Some associations actually just say, please note that the hearing will be on this date. You have an opportunity for a hearing. Do you want it? And then if they don't elect to be participating in that hearing, it's taken as, okay, we've satisfied the statutory requirement to give you an opportunity for a hearing. Once the grievance committee convenes, it should kind of be like a mini trial. People should be allowed to present their cases. And then the grievance committee can do one of 2 things. They can either uphold the fine or suspension or reject it. They cannot modify it. It's yes or no by a majority vote of the committee. From there,
Okay, you find somebody, and the owner says, you can find me all you want. I'm not going to pay it. What does the board do?
So if you're an HOA, if the fine gets to $1,000, you have the option of leaning and foreclosing for the fine. If you're a condo, you do not enjoy that right. But what will end up happening is that in the instance of the fine, you have the ability to have other consequences that follow, including suspending the right to vote in future votes of the association. You can also take advantage, and this is a great one for a lot of communities on Singer Island, because you have security for your buildings in a lot of instances. You can suspend use of certain non-essential common elements, I call them. That's my term for it. It's not in the statute, but basically you can suspend the right of people to use things like the owner's entrance, so they have to show their ID maybe to get into your building. You could suspend the right to use the pool and the gym, but those things obviously are easier if you have a key fob system. Otherwise, how are you physically going to stop someone from using the facility? But I always say that you're right. If you put $100 fine on someone's ledger, it may sit there until they sell the unit. And I've had, fines get collected further down the road. You just wait till they close. But otherwise, the suspension tool is not to be underestimated. I have resolved complex litigation disputes by taking away somebody. This is a true story. So I had a lawsuit that had about 50 grand in attorney's fees on both sides. We took over from prior counsel. As I'm reading up on the litigation, I asked the property manager, do you ever suspend any rights? He said, no, it was just too big an issue for that. He suspended the rights of the owner to use the owner's entrance to the community. The wife came home the next day. The husband was the one that was really in charge of this dispute. She reamed him and she said, I'm not going through the visitor's entrance of my own house. And the next day we got a call and we settled the lawsuit. So don't underestimate suspending the non-essential common elements.
You tell me I can't go to my pool. Keep me from it. What are you going to do? Are you going to forcibly keep me from it? Are you going to hire a guard? What are you going to do?
That's why I say the key fob is nice. If you have a system in your building, I don't know what Seawinds is like, Marty, but if you had a system where you needed a key fob.
We don't have a key fob. You can just walk right out from the door.
Then there's not much, and as a practical matter, I'll say there's not much you can do, because I don't want to put management or board members in a position where they have to physically try to remove people. It's going to cause conflict, and law enforcement will not get involved in this. Right. So yeah, it depends on the infrastructure of your community with how effective that can be and what your non-essential common elements are. as to how much you can really drive home that item. Otherwise, you can do things like suspend voting rights, which depends on your violator, how much that'll mean to them.
Michael,
Julie,
a
any
question,
comment? Oh, Bill, go ahead.
Michael, question about the grievance committee. Does that have to consist of people in the community on that committee, or can it be outside the community?
They should be members.
They have to be members.
Owners, yeah.
Owners.
Yep. Julie, any comment?
No, Marty, do you have a gate to get into the building? Do you have a front gate or a guardhouse?
We have not a gate, but we have a pass. There's a guardhouse with a 24-hour monitored by guards. And when you come through, you have to present your credentials to get in.
Okay, even owner, how do owners get in?
There is a sticker on the side of the car where they could drive right through.
So if you took off the sticker and every time they had to go through, they couldn't just go through as an owner, they had to show their
You're not
identity.
taking off my sticker, Julie. How are you going to do
But
that?
if, well,
Can you deactivate the sticker,
Yeah.
whatever the transponder number is on the sticker? Or
Of
the
one
serial
person,
number?
I don't know that,
yeah,
but
I
that
bet
would
you
be a
can.
thought.
I
Yeah.
bet you can, yes.
Marty, we have a hard stop coming up in about 20 minutes.
Okay, I have two more quick issues. All right. Issue with regard to communications with manager by owners. Should just the president be involved with talking to the manager or the management company, or should all directors be not permitted, but encouraged to talk to them? And should owners be encouraged to talk to directly with the manager or management company?
Mike,
If you're going to give it to me, then Julie, then
Yeah.
I'll say that I'm going back to the favorite answer in the lawyer book. It depends.
and
I like to think in most instances that sunshine, transparency, or sunlight rather, is the best disinfectant. It depends on the people you're dealing with. I like to start off from a place of open communication always and give people the benefit of the doubt. What happens in some instances, though, is that you will have either an owner or a director who thinks that they can interfere with the operations of the association and make it difficult for the manager to perform his or her day-to-day functions. So I think you need to be mindful of what your actual practices are. I don't think every owner and director has a right to 24/7 access to the management office or to the manager. So think about what you're dealing with. And if it's something that's taken advantage of, or your manager tells you I can't do my job, then I think you need to consider limiting access.
And the same would hold true with regard to communication with the board's attorneys. Only the board president should decide who should have that right, or else
Yeah,
it gets too complicated.
clearly two different issues. Let me address the first one. You have to be very careful about allowing board members and owners to speak directly or give directives to staff members. That has become such an issue in so many condos that I've heard about. You cannot have board members. We've had, we're being recorded. I don't want to say too much, but in the past, I know that there have been board members who think it's fine for me just to go into let me make something up. It's not true. The maintenance guy and say, I want you to do this, this, and this. No, that all communications with staff should come through the general manager. Board members can go to the general manager and say, hey, this is what we think should happen. And then the general manager, because you have chaos if that's not the way it's handled. Now, with regard to, what was the last one? What was the second
Board
one?
attorney.
Oh,
Board
God,
attorney.
only the board. If you let every board member talk to the attorney, you know what your attorney's bill is going to be? Forget about it. You can't
Exactly.
have every board member speaking to the attorney. They'd be picking up the phone every other day. I mean, you could only the board president or a designee or the head of the legal committee. Some board president and a designee, if that's appropriate. We had a legal committee, and Lou Brindisi, who was at the head at the time when I was on the board, would be the person who would, because he's an attorney, would be the person who would call the attorney. But if you cannot let every board member.
And the board should tell the attorney who may speak to the attorney from
Yes,
the
yeah, the
board.
attorney
The
shouldn't take
board
up.
should make it very clear that he cannot talk to anyone other
Yeah.
than whoever the president says.
Hi, this is Michael Kassower. Oh, you're you? Oh, no, sorry, I can't talk to you. Michael will do it in a polite way, but you cannot have every Tom, Dick, and Harry, Jane, and Mary calling the board's attorney. No.
Okay, last issue.
Okay, hey
dogs.
Marty, we have another question from the audience first,
ahead.
okay? And this is probably for Michael too. Michael, if you have 5 board members, can 3 of the board members meet with the property manager for discussions without having to notice a meeting, since the 3 of them constitute a quorum?
I'd say consult with your particular association lawyer, but if you ask me that question right now, letter of the law, recorded meeting, the only way to be sure you're not gonna have a problem is to notice that situation.
Right, that's right.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you.
Okay, dogs. Always a sensitive issue in most buildings. Most buildings don't allow dogs, and those that do allow dogs have rules with regard to dogs. We all know that service dogs are permitted in any building. They cannot be kept out under any circumstances. That's my understanding. But what about dogs who are not service dogs? How do directors deal with them?
I'll just speak from personal experience here. We do not allow dogs. We have 37 of them in the building. We don't allow dogs. They're all either service dogs or emotional support dogs. And I'm telling you, if you think you're going to stop dogs from being in the building, you're living on another planet, because anybody can get the piece of paper that says my dog is an emotional support dog. So it's a fight that's practically unwinnable, I think, in my personal experience here. I don't know, Michael's got more buildings, and Mike Sloser probably in your building. I don't know, do you allow pets in your building, Michael Sloser?
We allow 20-pound dogs and under
Okay.
20 pounds.
So,
But
so for you, it's not an issue.
we have a dog here that could be a pony. He's that large. And
Put a
that dog is
symbol
an
on it.
emotional support dog. And I
Yeah.
looked at that dog and I said, what is that dog doing here? And the answer was an emotional support dog. Person says she absolutely has to have this dog in order to function. She's
Yeah.
got the piece of paper.
So
But
Michael, I have a legal issue with regard to emotional support dog. We know that they get into the building. The question is, must they observe the same rules as service dogs?
Yeah.
Or yes?
Yeah,
This is one of the rare questions where I get to actually give somebody a favorable enforcement answer on an ESA, emotional support animal question. Yes, they can't be a nuisance. Is the one I'll simply say. Like, if your emotional support animal or service animal is barking at all hours of night or biting people, then that is something that you can enforce upon. Basically, I'm going to butcher the expression, but it's like the right to swing your fist, stops at the edge of the other person's nose, or right before that spot, probably. It's something like that, because when you deal with reasonable accommodations under the Fair Housing Act, there are limits to the accommodation. It should not cause undue financial burden on the association, and it should not unreasonably interfere with the use rights of other owners. So if you have a dog that is crossing that line, it's still
In
enforceable.
Seawinds, we have a rule that all dogs must be put in carriages or carried out of the building. They cannot be on leashes, or they cannot be let loose in the building or the hallways or the elevator. So emotional support dogs, are they bound by the same rule? Or can the owner simply say, we can do what we want, same as a service dog?
I'm going to go ahead and tell you to consult with your own personal association attorney on that. I get very nervous about restrictions in this regard, because I think you could make an argument, for instance, that the emotional support animal, the nature of that disability is not a physical impairment, and therefore that rule should still be that the nature of the accommodation granted need not extend to something that exempts them from that rule. But I do get nervous because really drilling down on a disability and what's involved in it is a delicate thing. And when you're dealing with disabilities, and let's say it's maybe a little bit vague, the nature of the disability, you could end up in a situation where you are telling somebody that has a disability that they need to do something physically that's a challenge for them. So very delicate issue, case by case basis, case by case with the disability, and candidly case by case with your association attorney and how aggressive he or she is willing to be in the advice.
We have a 70-pound dog that just moved in, an emotional support dog. That dog is never going into a wagon or never being carried.
Yeah,
End of question. Nothing we can do about it.
probably not. Risky if you do.
Yeah, all right. Julie, do you have any other issues that you'd like to bring up?
I think you've covered them all. I did want to say, with regard to communications in general on the island, not necessarily just for condominiums and HOAs, we have there's a way to get information from the city by going on the city's website. And if you put in your contact information, you will get regular alerts about things like hurricane warnings or water main closings, things like that. And it's really effective. There's also a way on the website to ask for assistance from any of the service departments. So if you see a pothole or you see trees that need to be cut down, rather than calling your friendly local commissioner, not that I would call, but there is a way to report that, and they prefer it. I don't mind it at all, and I just go ahead and send the request on to the right people. But they tell me that I should be encouraging people to use that method. And then the third thing is there's a lovely lady named Lee Innocenti who writes a newsletter that started out for her neighbors in the residences at the Marriott residences. And now she's making it available to everyone. And it's just chock full of information about what's going on the island in general and in the area in general, but most specifically on the island. And if you're interested in getting the newsletter from Lee, her contact information, her email is LEEINN for Lee Innocenti, LEEINN @hotmail.com. And that's a really good little newsletter to get. I think she does it on a quarterly basis, and she always leaves space for me to say what's going on the island or what's going on in Riviera Beach in general.
And I'll second that, by the way, Julie. It's a terrific newsletter.
She does a great job.
Yeah.
I think that's it from me.
Okay, before we turn it over to our president, Michael, do you have any other issues you'd like to bring up?
Oh, no, I did what I wanted to do. I became a referee and nothing more. This has been a great panel. Marty, thank you very much for framing some of these issues for us. It shows that we've been able to cover a lot of things. I personally think this is one of the more productive meetings we've ever done because we've covered so much ground, but maybe the next meeting will also be the same way. So we'll hope for the best. Thank you very much. Julie, thank you for putting on that condo hat again.
My pleasure.
We appreciate it. And always great to have you here. And Michael,
this is Kathleen. I just wanted to say it was a great session. I really enjoyed it and I learned quite a bit. Thank you.
Thanks, Kathleen.
thank you, Kathleen.
Thank you.
And Michael, thank you very much. A lot of people got a lot of legal advice today.
Yep.
That's terrific. I just want to remind everybody before we jump off this meeting, next March 5th, we have a meeting called How to Manage Your Property Manager or Management Company, plus the secret to hiring the property manager, management company that is best for your community. That is a program that we want to do only for members only. We ask you to ask your managers to please understand this is not an appropriate meeting to bring anybody besides that group of people to the meeting. We will announce it for more detail in the near future. And on April 2nd, pesticides and pretty property, how to deal with iguanas, pesticides, and other tropical variables, plus how to beautify and care for your property with the best flowers, trees, plantings for our region. We're going out with a non-controversial topic. Everyone should be there. You'll make pretty property and make Julie smile like she's smiling right now. Everybody, thank you very much. Thank you to the people who've attended the meeting today. Thank you for a terrific panel. And we look forward to seeing everybody back here on March 5th. Thanks a
And
lot.
go vote on March 8th. Go vote.
Vote
Thank you.
March 8th, exactly.
Thank you. Have a great
And we'll
week.
let you know about the video that we're working on.
Take care.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Bye.
you. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.